I am Mateo Mayorga of 5 Reasons Sports. Today I have with me a very special guest. He covered professional basketball for over 50 years, is a Green Beret, and one of the greatest storytellers the world ever saw. I'm joined by Peter Vecsey. Sir, how are you? And thank you for being here.
That's a hell of an introduction right there. Okay.
I appreciate it. It's not every day I speak to a Hall of Famer.
Shoot.
Peter, before we get started into the NBA and the ABA, we must touch a little bit on the Rucker. You and Julius Erving arrived there for your first time together, but was it the community reaction that motivated you to come back there every weekend for 6 years? I saw you posted pictures on Twitter of people watching from the rooftops, which is incredible.
No, I didn't need anybody to motivate me. I was motivated to go up there initially. I had read Pete Axsom's book, The City Game. He talked about, people that I had no idea could exist on the basketball court. Guys like Earl Manigault, the GOAT, Herman Helicopter, Nolings, guys like that, Pee Wee Kirkland, Joe Hammond. So I was, greatly attracted to go up there, and was lucky enough to have a friend in my community where I lived who was from Harlem, a guy named Butch Purcell, who got me introduced to the commissioner of the Harlem Professional League at that time. It was no longer called the Rucker Tournament. Holcomb had died of cancer at 39. So Butch got me involved with Bob McCullough, who was the commissioner, and Freddie Crawford was the assistant. Freddie played in the NBA for a number of years for the Knicks and Lakers. He played at St. Bonaventure. Saw him the other day when I was at Rucker, and not in the best of health, but we've all gotten old. So I was motivated to go up there. Lucky enough to get a team, so I organized it. I recruited. Butch Purcell was my assistant coach, and he and I stayed together for 4 years up there. We won 2 titles, and then I came back in the early 80s with my own team. It was sponsored by Pony Sneakers, and we won twice again. But Julius, I done a couple of stories on him when he was at the University of Massachusetts. I was at the New York Daily News trying to break in as a writer. I had no really schooling for it. I only went to college for 6 months at Hofstra. Played ball there for the 6 months I was there, and then I got a full-time job at the Daily News, so I quit. And so I went up there and just tried to make my bones up there. Julius and I, like I said, I'd done 2 stories on him at UMass, once as a sophomore, once as a junior, and then he came out of college after his junior year. He'd averaged 20 points, 20 rebounds, one of the few college players ever to do that. And so I recruited him. I had a friend who played at Hofstra behind me, a guy named Dave Brownbill. He was really tight with Julius. They're both from Long Island. And then so here we were. We showed up, together the same day for the first time. And as I told everybody many, many times, we're sitting on the bench, the 3 of us, and Julius asks me, well, when am I going to get paid? and I said, Julius, as far as I know, nobody gets paid up here. And so he and Dave, they took a walk around the playground, around the park. They came back. He put on his sneakers, and that was that. And he never got paid. He never got paid a dime. There was one trip I found out years and years later where the commissioner, McCullough, who I just mentioned, he paid his plane fare back from Atlanta. Julius had jumped from the Virginia Squires of the ABA to the Atlanta Hawks. He had moved to Atlanta, and that was overruled by the NBA, whatever. He came back. But so he's in Atlanta, and I did not know it. McCullough wanted the star there. Good for me, good for my team, because we did win it that day. And again, McCullough didn't tell me that. Julius never told me. McCullough told me that, several years ago. Wow. And So that's how he and I got together, and we've stayed together. We worked together at NBC for a few years, doing the NBA, and we still stay in touch.
Wow. Peter, how close did the games at the Rucker League come to resembling old school all-star games of the NBA?
Well, they were nothing like them, actually, because the old school NBA all-star games were, I mean, they were ferocious. And I'm not saying, the Rucker wasn't for real. It was, but now you've got, 20 or 24 all-stars going at each other. Not like today's all-star games. They would play defense. They wouldn't like it if you tried to dunk on them. They don't, they take you out. You come to the hoop, you're going to pay. And so those all-star games are long gone. Unfortunately, the only guy I've ever seen that played that kind of ball in an all-star game since was Jakeem Noah. When he was an all-star, I was cheering for him because he was playing defense. He was rebounding. He wasn't afraid to hurt people, not hurt them, but hit them. And he's the only guy I can remember. But the games at Rucker were a lot like the games in the NBA today. It was on the move, run and stun.
More of a finesse, would you say?
What's that?
Would you say it's more of a finesse game than a physical game? Was it physical game?
No, it was physical too, but it was physical on the run. No, there were guys. Look, Julius, we talked about it the other day when we were in Rucker about somebody who tried to hurt him, going to the hoop. Guy named Tom Hoover. Excuse me, guy named Tom Hoover. He's about 6'9", out of not sure where he went now, but he was in high school out of Archbishop Carroll in Washington, and he played in the NBA for a number of years. He was there the other day too. Hoover looks at it a different way. He made up a whole story about what happened, but Julius took him to the hoop, and Hoover was known to try to hurt people, and Julius broke Hoover's hand on the rim. So no, it was very physical, and but guys would they weren't afraid to go to the hoop and stay in the air. I mean, Julius, people have no idea what it was like to watch him, with the springy legs and his ability to, he was an outlaw of gravity, and it was unbelievable. Butch, my sister and I, we would look at each other, what the hell did we just see? He would do one of his things, and he wasn't the only one to do this stuff, but he did it better and more often than anyone else. And he would just go to the hoop. The crowd, after he would finish a play, up in Harlem, up in Rucker, they would do a dance on the court. There'd be 30 people on the court dancing at one end after, just erupting in celebration at some of those moves that he would make. And not only him, other guys, same thing. If you came up with something that was unseen before or creative, the fans would get involved immediately. You had to time out while the fans had to clear the court of the fans.
To clarify on that play, Peter, so Julius Erving broke his fingers with the force of slamming the ball?
Yeah. Yes.
That is incredible.
Yeah, broke his hand. Yeah. Broke his wrist, probably.
That's incredible force. But you were there, like you just mentioned, you were there. Was it last weekend when they were renovating it? The renovation?
Yeah. Yes, when they celebrated the renovation of it. Actually, it wasn't a renovation. They totally rebuilt it from the cement up, and the NBA and a lot of other sponsors paid for it. And so, yeah, it was a VIP thing. People were invited back from the day, and not enough people heard about it. It was sad, actually. I mean, I would have loved to had people from my team show up, but I was invited by Julius, and then And then the NBA issued me an invitation. I was allowed to bring a couple of people, but I would have loved to have my teams there. There's still probably 20 guys still alive that would have come. And a couple of days later, I got a call from Charlie Scott, who was on my first team or two. And he and Julius played together in Virginia. And then Charlie jumped to Phoenix and won a championship with the Celtics and just went into the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago. But I got a call from him about it. So it was in fact, he and I are probably going to do a podcast about his perception of what that day was about and what it should have been about. I'm not going to talk about it here because I'm going to let Charlie do it. He says he wants to do it. We'll see if he'll do it. I hope he does.
That sounds excellent. I can't wait to hear it myself. But transitioning now to the ABA, Peter, the league started in 1967, 1968. What did NBA people think about the rivalry?
Well, they didn't consider it a rivalry. They just, considered a bunch of guys that didn't make the NBA. They just started their own league, and then tried to force a merger. That was the initial thing. The first few years, I'm sure. I know the feeling at my office at the New York Daily News Sports Department was, you want to go up there and, you want to cover the ABA, nobody else wants to cover it. So you'll do it on your time and your dime. And so that's what I did for a few years, more than a few years. I don't think I got promoted as a sports writer until I should look it up, but maybe 73, 74. When I started covering the Knicks full time. So they look down on it. Definitely the NBA hierarchy, guys like Jerry Colangelo, who was the general manager of the Suns, he's still an NBA snob to this day. He still doesn't think that there are other players in the NBA that deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. He's in charge of the Hall of Fame committee. Not the Hall of Fame committee. He's in charge of the Hall of Fame, basically. They were frowned upon. The league, but the players knew. They knew who could play because they started playing exhibitions and I don't know, 70, 71 in that area. I'm not sure exactly, but they knew because the ABA was winning more than half the games. And so the players know. You don't have to tell them who can play. And so, the ABA tried to get them to merge and wasn't able to do it until 1976 after that season. And then the coaches caught on. I'll tell you, it's interesting because back in those days, there were, neither league scouted a lot. You would rely on your friends around who were watching college ball or watching playgrounds, around you'd rely on them to tell you who could play and not. So I'll give you a perfect example of that. It's like, when I started covering the Knicks in 73, 74 full time, Red Holzman we used to meet before the team bus on the road. And, he'd ask me what was going on. Okay, well, what do you hear? He'd always ask, what do you hear? What do you hear? So I tell him what I heard. And then he would ask me about certain ABA players. What about this guy? What about that guy? And I would tell him what I thought. And that was perfectly illustrated when I found out years and years later that once there was a merger and then they had a dispersal draft of the players that were left over, Portland wound up getting 3 ABA players. They got Moses Malone, they got Maurice Lucas, and they got Dave Twardzik. Now, 2 of those guys were starters on the championship team in 77. So Moses was making too much money, for Portland to keep.
Do you mean the championship Trailblazer team?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Go on.
So he's on that team. He's on that team before the season starts. They have 3 ABA players that they just picked up, and that team wins the championship. But not with Moses. Moses got traded in the summertime to Buffalo for a #1 draft pick. And then 2 weeks later, Buffalo trades him to Houston for 2 number 1 draft picks. But before that, Jack Ramsey told me, and I didn't know this until, years and years and years later. He said that his owner said, look, you're tight with the general managers and the coaches in the NBA. Call around and see if you can, see what we can get for Moses Malone, because he was making $300,000. I know it's a joke today, but $300,000, and Walton was making $300,000. So they didn't want to pay $600,000 to the guys playing the same position. So see what you can get. So he did. He called around, and the only one I know for sure, I read where he called Auerbach about Moses. I don't know that for a fact, but I do know what Ramsey told me. So he called Red Holzman, and he said, would you like to acquire Moses Malone? But Holzman had no idea how good Moses Malone was. And he didn't have me next to him on the bus telling him. So he said, well, is he as good as John Gianelli? That was the Knicks center at the time, starting center, the sheriff, John Gianelli.
Oh,
and Jack Ramsey goes, yeah, Red, he's better. He's far better than John Gianelli. And Red says, nah, I think we're going to stay with what we got. Now, how about that?
That is unbelievable. That's shocking. It's incomprehensible. Moses Malone is a legend. It doesn't get
could have had his whole career in New York, except for 2 years in the ABA. But I saw him play. He wasn't fantastic in the ABA, but he was right out of high school. Wow. 6'10". So you knew how you could see how good he was going to be. He needed to put on some weight. He came in very skinny, but you knew he was a hard worker. And so, one of the many deals that the New York Knicks screwed up, either by omission or commission.
Wow. Peter, in those days, well, you were still a beat writer for the ABA. What was media availability like the access reporters, media members have? How was it?
Well, we had full access. we had access that's not to be believed. We would be allowed to go anywhere to do anything. The locker room was wide open before and after games, right up until tip off, or right after the game. Unless there was a fight in the locker room, you weren't allowed in. You not only had access to players on the court, you had access to them off the court. It was a place where you could pick up a lot of bad habits, and I must say I did pick up more than my share. So I was hanging out with those guys. I was young, and they were young. We were about the same age for the most part, and I'd be partying with them after games, and everybody would be partying together. Didn't matter who you were. Referees, no lie, coaches, players, writers, cheerleaders, trainers, everybody was out partying, and I loved the ABA.
Is that camaraderie that you just described exclusive to the ABA?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. I mean, the NBA had its camaraderie at some point for sure, but not like that. Not like guys going out like that. You might have had, cliques going out together. Like when I was traveled with the Celtics in '86, I traveled for 2 weeks with them on the West Coast. There were like 3 or 4 cliques on the team, and it did appear to break down racially, but I don't think that's what it was. I think people were just friends. In the clique that I hung out with on that trip was Bird, Walton, Carlisle, and Seasting. We went out to dinner, almost every night, whatever, before, on an off night or after a game. Or there was no commercial. I'm sorry, there was no charters back then. You flew by commercial airline. And so you stayed the night in the city where you played. Sometimes you practiced in that city too before you left the next day. And so the other clique on the team, you had McHale and Ainge and Kite. and then you have Dennis Johnson with Parrish and Sam Vincent. And so I know I'm missing somebody. Wedman was probably with the McHale group. So I might have covered everybody there. So that, I mean, those were the cliques, and there was nothing untoward about it, or, you know, people would say today, what the hell's going on? You can't do that. So, you know, the NBA, you know, ABA didn't matter. Everybody was together. I mean, really, I went out with some of the greatest guys going, and went out with desperados. You know, there was a lot of shit happening. Let me tell you.
I'm very envious, Peter, but in the ABA years, we've spoken about Julius Erving. How many players in the NBA were on his level, if there were any, would you say?
I mean, there were guys on his level that did different things. You know, look, if Julius certainly was responsible, number one, for the merger. The NBA wanted him. The NBA was playing boring ball. The ABA was, you know, amped up, running stun, like I told you. You know, I remember Brian Taylor telling me when he got to the NBA, he was like, what kind of game are they playing? You know, boy, no wonder there was a merger. They needed us to get this, to get the fans going, get some excitement into the building. And so, you know, they were guys, look, they were great. Look, Kareem was there, you know, John Havlicek was there, Cowens was there, Tiny Archibald was there, you know, he was with the Nets when they had a merger. They traded for him, but no, there were a lot. But Julius had his own way of playing that, you know, the fans were excited and delighted by the whole thing, but they never saw the Julius from the ABA, and certainly never saw the Julius from the Rucker. You know, Kevin Lockery had, if Julius had stayed with the Nets and not held out, he was way ahead of Simmons. I mean, he held out. He was holding out, you know, in 77 before the season, and wanted to renegotiate his contract. There was different reasons, but if he had stayed and played with Tiny, and then Tiny got hurt 35 games, some numbers just stick. 35 games into that season, he got hurt again. But if they had played together and Kevin Lockery had coached Julius as he had to 2 titles, the NBA would have seen the real Julius, because Kevin let him go when he was with the Philadelphia team. You know, Julius said recently on a podcast that I did that when he got there, Pat Williams, the general manager, told him, you know, we don't want you to, you know, to be a one-man team here. We want you to be part of the team. So he was holding him back.
Wow.
And I never knew that. I never knew it till he told me that, you know, a couple months ago. I was shocked. Why would you get Julius Erving and then put the clamps on him, you know? And then Gene Shue felt the same way. They had George McGinnis, they had Doug Collins, you know, they had Lloyd Free. They had a lot of scorers on the team. So he also held him back. And then Billy Cunningham, who came in after him, did the same thing, which is kind of, you know, whatever. Billy wasn't held back. You know, he was allowed to play the way he did. So it's a shame the way it happened. And Julius even admitted on the podcast that, you know, he looks back at it and feels that maybe he did make a mistake, that he should have stayed with the Nets. Yeah.
When he was holding out with the Nets, how many years did he have left on his contract? Because you gave the jab at Simmons. He has 4 years.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Don't remember. It was multiple. It wasn't 1 year. But, you know, Julius contended, and his agent, Erwin Weiner, contended that there was a verbal agreement that the contract would be renegotiated if there were a merger. Now, again, I've maintained over the years, you know, Erwin Weiner was a very good agent. In fact, he represented Cunningham. He represented Walt Frazier. He had a lot of different guys. Why wouldn't that be in writing? Why? Makes no sense. Should have been in writing.
Fair. It's unfair.
So I think Irwin was probably trying to cover himself with Julius and tell him this swing was happening. I don't know, but it's a damn shame. I'll tell you one thing. During the holdout, Julius was working out in Hempstead High School. He's from Roosevelt High School, right next door to Hempstead. So he worked out there to stay in shape, and I'd go out and work out with him. And I still have some photos on my wall I have 4 or 5 photos on my wall of us two working out. Some of my most prized possessions. I've never revealed them. I've never shown them. Wow. If I do a book, I'll show them. But yeah, tremendous. The Daily News sent out a photographer to take pictures. They never got in the paper, and I love those photos. Wow. I had a lot of hair then.
Yeah. Wow. Peter, it seems like the NBA is making a mistake in not, showing more footage of ABA games on NBA TV. It doesn't make sense. What are your thoughts on that? It doesn't seem like they're educating younger fans or the other generation.
Julio, I don't know. I didn't even know that. I don't pay attention to that. The league, to me, they should try to put everything together. They again, there's a snobbishness, there's a separation of points. Why? You're saying the ABA wasn't as good? It was as good. So why wouldn't the points count? Yeah, I get it. So it's the NBA, but a lot of us feel the same way. I don't follow what they put on TV, what they don't put on, who's calling the shots there. I don't think the league is doing it. It's up to the television people. They make all the decisions. I saw something today. I was watching I'm trying to think of it. Whitlock. Whitlock was doing something with Kwame Brown. And I'm not really sure. No, it was Whitlock. Whitlock was saying that Stephen Smith, who I have really no respect for, but whatever. He's doing okay without my respect. But he was saying that he'd have more respect for Stephen if he'd come down on David Stern and stuff. First of all, Jason, Stern has been dead for a few years. I don't know what the hell you're talking about with that. You could have mentioned Adam Silver. But, he said he'd have more respect for him if he'd come down on the NBA. He was trying to imply, or basically said it, that the NBA was calling his shots, that he was their boy. That is so untrue. I mean, it's so untrue. The NBA, I worked for NBC for 12 years, and I worked for TNT, and I even did a lot of radio for ESPN. But nobody from the league office was calling shots for me, and I know they're not calling it for him because they wouldn't like much of what he says. Now, I'm sure they're not happy with it, and I'm sure they're not happy with the product that ESPN is struggling to put together, something that's going to attract fans. I mean, to me, they messed up again. They're going to bring back Magic Johnson. Why? Why are they bringing him back? He's never given any insight into anything regarding basketball. Well, whatever. But stay with, Stephen Smith for a second. And so this was totally wrong. And I don't know where he gets that impression that the league is calling the shot. The TV is paying for the league. They're overpaying. They're paying a tremendous amount of money, both TNT and when I worked 12 years at NBC, David Stern never, ever called me about anything. He never said I couldn't say anything. He never said he was angry about something I said. If I'd run into him, he was upfront guy. He said, man, you see, that bullshit you said on the air the other day, what do you know, blah, blah, blah. But never made the call to my boss, Dick Ebersol, and said, hey, why are you letting him say this? You can't. No. So it's certainly not happening now. And so I don't even know what your question was, but I gave you answers for everything.
No shortage of answers, Peter. You mentioned something about Magic Johnson, and I'd be remiss if I didn't go back on it. A couple of years ago, there was a reporting by Baxter Holmes of ESPN that discovered not so nice behavior on Magic's part behind the scenes running the Lakers, and it was strange because that day the report came out, Wilbon and Stephen A. Smith held a rather a la carte interview for Magic Johnson, and they didn't even ask him if any of that stuff was true, and there were some pretty serious allegations in there. It's unfortunate.
Well, I don't know the report. I don't remember it. But I know that, Wilbon and I mean, he kisses a lot of ass, of superstars. He wrote Barkley's book, and and he's still there, and he's smart. I mean, I like Michael, but a lot of not a lot of cred with a lot of stuff that's on the air with what he says, whatever. Like in the documentary on Jordan. I mean, nothing. He's giving you nothing you didn't know. I don't know about Smith. I'm sure. So obviously he's with Magic on this show, so he's kissing his ass too. But I worked with Magic at NBC. Nothing, zero. There were very few guys that I worked with at NBC that would give you anything of import, of consequence. Nothing. They weren't. You need reporters who are willing to say it, what's going on. Wilbon is only going to say a certain amount. Aldridge, would never say anything. I would be breaking stories, that left and right that these guys, wouldn't have touched in a million years to put it on television or in the paper. But whatever, they're doing their thing and they're getting paid for it. They're getting paid to, to be nice. Not Stephen A. He's getting paid to be outrageous, and that works well for him.
Peter, I want to touch on one last thing for the ABA. I know we kind of segued a little bit, but I'm glad we did. Why isn't the pension fund the same for the retired ABA players as it is for the NBA players? If I read correctly in a piece Ed Odevan wrote, I hope I pronounced his last name right, that retired ABA players get $60 a month. That's ridiculous. They helped form what basketball is now. Where do you stand on this, Peter?
Well, obviously, I'm anything the ABA can get, I'm all for it. And I do believe that's going to happen very, very soon. They're going to get a pension. They don't get a pension now. They don't get it from anybody. So there are only maybe 100, 110 ABA players left to qualify for pension of playing 3 or more or 2.5, more than 2.5 seasons, either ABA and NBA combined. Only 110 or so. I mean, they're dying left and right. There's been negotiation going on for well over a year. I do believe it's going to happen. They're not going to get rich off of it. There was never an agreement, although the ABA players certainly believed there was an agreement about a pension when they merged. It's a very complicated story about, San Antonio Spurs when were supposed to take care of things. They messed everything up. They wound up paying off a number of players a lot of money, but the rest of the guys got nothing or next to nothing. So look, these guys can definitely, most of them can definitely use a pension. I wouldn't be able to retire. I'd still be working if I didn't get a pension. I got pension. I was very lucky to get pensions from After and 2 newspapers. So that's why I'm still spouting off at the mouth, because I have fuck you money.
Wow. Peter, I'd like to go now into the NBA, but I must know, how did you meet Wilt Chamberlain?
How did I meet him? Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how I met him first time. I know there was a guy named Charlie Polk who used to work at Wilt's Small Paradise in Harlem. It was his club that he owned. And I believe he sang there, and he was Wilt's guy, a skinny little guy. He'd show up everywhere, no matter what what basketball event was going on. Charlie would be there. And he'd be there as a guest. He wouldn't go to his pocket for anything. He'd show up at some meals, and we trying to, hey, look, don't tell Charlie where we're eating tonight, because he never went to his pocket. But I like him. And he's the first one that told me. He says, Wilt really likes you. I said, really? He said, yeah, man, he's talking about you all the time. Yeah. I said, man, that is fabulous, fabulous. Now I covered him a little bit in the ABA when he was coaching the Conquistadors, but I never got tight with him, and I never got tight with him when he played. But then, we'd run into each other, and he just gave me such respect. Of course I loved him. I remember bringing my girlfriend in high school to a game at the Old Garden. Beautiful little blonde girl. I'm still in love with her. Her name was Paula. And I had a picture taken with her and Wilt. And I wish I had that photo. I don't know what happened to it. She probably has it. I'm just wondering if she was one of Wilt's 20,000.
Oh my God.
Well, he was known to go after wives and girlfriends of players and friends and stuff like that.
He was probably king of the world at that point, Peter.
But I'll tell you something. I mean, it's not going to do any good to tell you, because it'll still go on and on and on. Yeah, he was very, very sorry that he allowed them to put a number on that, women he slept with 20,000. He never believed that anything was close to that, but they wanted something. They wanted a hook, and he went with it. He said, yeah, okay. And he was embarrassed his whole life. He was embarrassed for his parents. He was embarrassed for his sisters. So he, forget about his sexual prowess and all. The guy was a decent guy, man. I loved being around him, loved listening to his stories. I couldn't get enough. I really need to, before these guys die, I need to reach out to a few people who know him well. Like Michael Arison, who was Paul Arison's son. Wilt befriended Michael's daughter, who was dying for over a span of time and did die, and what Wilt did for her, show up for her, just show up. There was a tremendous story in the Philadelphia papers written about it years ago. If you could find it, it's well worth finding. Guy like Tommy Kearns, who played at North Carolina, played against Wilt in the triple overtime game. Frank McGuire, the coach of UNC, had Kearns jump center against Wilt, against Kansas. 5'10",
Oh my
7,
God.
just to mess with his mind. Tommy became Wilt's stockbroker. Tommy's still alive. I just got his number recently, and so I want to put together some Wilt stories that nobody's ever heard.
That sounds like an incredible idea. I'm sure you will be able to put it together. But Peter, in that era, he was dominating individually, and he did break through to win 2 championships. But in that era, Bill Russell won 11 in 13 years, and he did join the league a little earlier than Wilt. But how much better were Russell's teams than Wilt's?
I think they came in right around the same time, didn't they?
I think Bill may have come in a couple years early, or a year.
No, I don't think so. Wait a minute. So he played in the 60 Olympics, right? 56, 60 Olympics. I can't remember. No, I think they're very close, but whatever. Because, Wilt had to play with the Globetrotters for a year. He dropped out of Kansas. Whatever. Look, the bottom line is, Russell had every player almost on his team became a Hall of Famer. Was it because they won so much, or was it because they were so great? take your pick. They were pretty damn good players, Cousy, Sharman, Heinsohn, Havlicek, Sam Jones, Casey Jones, on and on, all Hall of Famers. And Wilt had, in Philadelphia where he won a championship. He had Billy Cunningham. He had Chet Walker. Trying to think, there must have been one other. Oh, Hal Greer. So he had three. And other guys were really good, but I mean that was a big difference. And each year there was a different reason, and each year comes down to the last game or whatever, or last shot, or lucky bounce. When Don Nelson's shot bounced up in the air, and they beat them in Game 7, and what was that, 69? It was like, are you kidding me? And Nelson's in the Hall of Fame too, but Nelson as a coach, not as a player. But anyway, yeah, I think it all came down to that. And Wilt beat them twice, beat the Knicks in, not, was it the Knicks? I can't even remember. No, he won with the Lakers, in 72.
Yes.
Tough to keep all this in my mind here.
Peter, did you ever get to speak with Wilt on the night he won a championship?
No, because I didn't cover the league then. No.
Okay. After well, one second.
You're not used to me saying no to anything.
No.
You expect me to keep going on, but I trying to think. No, I never did. I wish I had covered that 72 championship year. I mean, look, they won 33 in a row that year. The Bucks beat them in the 33rd game, with Kareem. I think they started their record against the Bucks. Years later, I'm trying to think of the year, maybe it was 2012. Okay, so that would have been right. So they had a reunion in LA, that Laker team. And I had become very good friends with the Sharmans, Bill Sharman and Joyce, his wife. And they invited me. I was the only writer invited to the dinner preceding the event, which was upstairs at a Marriott in LA. And so my table, Wilt was dead, so his sister, Barbara, her husband, who was a Globetrotter, he was there at my table. Jerry West and his wife, Leroy Ellis and his wife, and Flynn Robinson and his wife, and me. Jerry West and I are the only ones alive of the men. Leroy and Flynn Robinson had cancer at the time. Both of them passed. And anyway, that was a huge day for me. So I didn't cover the team, but here I was given the respect to be in that little group. One of my favorite things that day before we went upstairs. The upstairs, they had like 1,000 people upstairs for this, and then it became a documentary, and everybody got to speak upstairs. But so we had a little get together on the side. It was me, Jim McMillan, Gail Goodrich, and Pat Riley. Wow. And we're just telling stories. And Jim McMillan is complaining to me. He said, yeah, he's complaining to everybody. He said, yeah, Vecsey. Now he's from Columbia. So I covered him in college. One of my favorite people, and he's passed now too. So we're there, and he's saying, Vecsey, man, he named me on the top 5 players who can't jump. And we're laughing about that. And then he goes, yeah, he said, that was bad enough, but then he made me the captain of the team. And Gail Goodrich says, well, that sounds about right. So those kind of anecdotes, those kind of experiences, stories, never forget it. Jimmy was having a tough time walking then too.
Wow. A
lot of guys were having a tough time walking.
Peter, is it, you mentioned the 1972 championship a moment ago, and it reminded me, is it not weird that the Los Angeles Lakers weren't claiming the titles of the Minneapolis Lakers for their count at that time, because in 1987, their championship ring says on the side of it, "Drive for 5." And it's weird because George Mikan won with the Minneapolis Lakers 5 titles. And it just seems weird that the Lakers at one point were not counting them, but now when they do this count, yeah, we have 17.
No, I think they always counted them. I think they always counted them. Now, why the drive for 5? I mean, so that was a slogan. That was, maybe they should have said the second drive for 5.
It makes sense when you with the 5th one in the city of Los Angeles, but it's always struck me as odd, a little maybe perhaps disrespectful to the Minneapolis team. Maybe I'm a little crazy.
Well, I think they are disrespectful. I think that if they were respectful, they would not have all the Minneapolis numbers of the guys who were retired, who are in the Hall of Fame. Pollard, and I won't be able to name them all. Slater, Martin, and Mikan, and Mickelson. Not bad, 4. And then the coach is in the Hall of Fame too. So they have them all on one banner.
That's
really one banner. Stop. No, it is disrespectful. Absolutely. Jeannie Buss and all, they don't do the right thing a lot. I complain all the time about nobody writing a book, or Jeannie Buss not being behind a movie to talk about the day that the Lakers plane had to crash land in a snowstorm in Iowa, in the winter, and no power, and like the pilot who is still alive is in touch with Jeannie. He's 97. He's still in touch with Jeannie. She built a court there, full court on the farm where it happened, but that's as far as it goes. Nobody takes it further. And I said to my friend today, I said, maybe what should have happened was they should have all died in the plane crash. Then there would have been 8 movies and 6 documentaries and all sorts of stuff. But it's an incredible story. And Elgin Baylor was on that flight, and so if the flight does go down, they were out of gas. I mean, you gotta read it. Look it up.
Absolutely.
Miracle Flight, it's called. A little book, but I wrote a column about it in 2009, but did it better for the Players Association. I did it recently. I did an upgrade of it. Anyway, there should have been something happening, because look, somebody should have done something, because let's face facts, and I've said this before. If the Laker plane goes down and they die, there are no Lakers. That's the end of the Lakers. They're in Minnesota at the time. They're in Minneapolis at the time. They die. That's the end of the Lakers. They don't come to LA. Why would they come to LA? There's no team. They hadn't come there yet. They went the next year. And you know what? There might not be an NBA. There were only 8 teams at the time. How can this not be a movie? It's a joke. It's a joke. It's sad. Especially you get the pilot still alive. Not only still alive, coherent, more coherent than me and you put together. It's amazing. All right.
Wow. Peter, sticking with the Lakers a little bit, but now going into the 80s, it's in this time the rivalry between the Celtics and the Lakers started up again with Bird and Magic. But how did their contrasting personalities make this a bigger thing, make the rivalry big?
Well, I don't know if it was their personality so much. Certainly they were different. One was flamboyant, and Bird was very low key, but Bird, he's no bird brain. He tells some damn good stories, man, and he knows what's up. He's very intelligent. But he's the hick from French Lick, and then Magic is, he's out there. He wants the marquee, he wants the microphone, he wants everything from him. So yeah, they were different that way. But I think the biggest difference was one was white and one was black, and they played against each other in the finals of the NCAAs. And so the rivalry was right from college, came right into the pros. They alternated championships, awards, blah, blah, blah. So the 80s were phenomenal to cover. Those series were phenomenal. And then you had, the Pistons, biting their heels, in the end of the 80s, and then Jordan shows up, and the 80s I don't think you can beat the 80s. 90s were pretty damn good, but the 80s were so many different things going. You had Philly was terrific. Julius, Milwaukee was terrific. There were some great teams that never made it past the Eastern Conference Final. How many Philadelphia won? How many titles in that decade? 3. Trying to think. Help me out.
So which team?
In the 80s. In the 80s.
Which team did you last mention?
Philly.
Philly won. 83.
Only one?
83.
That was the only one. Wow.
Julius Erving and Moses Malone were the last 2 MVPs, and
wow. Okay, I slouch corrected, but they were there. They were there playing for the championships and vying for. It was a tremendous league to cover.
Absolutely, but you mentioned Michael Jordan. He's drafted into the league in '84, but was there really something different about this guy, or was he just the greatest commercialized athlete perhaps ever? Because the way ESPN gasses him up, it's like he's head and shoulders above guys like Wilt and Kareem and Bill, and I refuse to believe such a thing, Peter.
Hey, guy was great.
I know he was that fabulous.
The guy was great, and for a time, who did he have? The only super player that he played with for a long time was Pippen, and then Rodman came around, but carried a team. He needed help for sure. Krause deserves a lot of the reason why, and he never gets that. Never got it. No, he was great. Commercialized. I don't know. He was pretty damn good. I saw him. You could look up my column I wrote on him the first time I saw him play exhibition season at the Garden. Against the Knicks, and you see what I said about it in the first column I saw him play. So I recognize greatness, and that's not to devalue Wilt. So Wilt was fantastic, and Russell, he was the greatest role player ever. He was able to steer that franchise to 11 titles in 13 years. With great players around him, so he did what was necessary. But look, my favorite player of all time was Bird.
But really,
don't tell Julius that.
I'm kind of shocked. I would have thought it would be Julius or Wilt Chamberlain, but does it have to do with
I got to take a drink.
No problem. No problem. Wow.
All right.
Does it have to do a little with like the man Larry Bird or?
No, I sensational to watch play. Look, if I'm voting for Julius as the best player I ever saw in the Rucker, the ABA, yeah, but he didn't become that in the NBA, and unfortunately, he had coaches that put him in handcuffs. But Bird was always Bird, and his personality was just so arrogant and cocky and. We don't have to go into all his stories, and he was just a fabulous guy to go out with, to be around. And I've told him to his face, you're the best, years, not that long ago, a few years ago, you're the best, you're my favorite. You were always my favorite. If you'd asked me to do the book instead of Bob Bryant, it still wouldn't be written. I'm slow.
That's so cool.
I give it all to podcasts.
I hope so. Peter, the last thing I want to ask on Michael, what version did we ultimately see? Well, we saw the version the writers wanted, but what's the real version of Michael? Because he had editorial control over the entire project, and you once mentioned before how you had written a piece on him, and David Falk and him did not like what you had to say, and they questioned your character when that was not true. How much of the real version did we see in the last days?
You saw how boastful he was, and you saw how brutal he could be, brutally honest and brutally dishonest too by stuff he didn't talk about. Look, I've gone through that Falk Jordan thing so much. I'm just did it again yesterday with somebody else. It's too long to get into. But Michael lied about what he said. I printed it wasn't true. It was all true. And it's the only column that I have actually in my office where I live now. I had three different parts on the wall. I put it up, and had it, and because I was really proud of it, unbelievably proud, because it was all spontaneous. Nothing. Again, you couldn't do that today. You couldn't show up somewhere and get an interview with a guy who hadn't given an interview to anybody since he left basketball, and I got him while he was playing baseball. He said what he said. People are gonna have to look it up. Definitely happened. So yeah, I mean, Michael be caught in a lot of lies. If I were, yeah, for real. I mean, all you gotta do is you look up what he said one day and what he said the other day. You catch him in lies. But I still like him. He helped me a lot in my writings when I was covering him, and what can I say?
Wow. Peter,
I will say it in the book. If I ever finish that damn book, I will come up with every lie that he's told.
I hope so. But as we wind down, what are your thoughts on the game today?
I certainly love a lot of the talent. I absolutely love watching some of these guys play. Hold on, it's starting to pour.
No problem.
And it's coming in my window. All right. So to watch Curry and Durant, so many guys, the way they play, it's fabulous. But I hate the style. Everybody's a 3-point shooter. Although I do believe it's changing back a little bit. I believe that with Chris Paul shooting so many pull-up jumpers in the lane last playoffs, other guys are going to emulate him because it's the easiest shot in the world. Mm-hmm. Unstoppable shot in the lane and pull back. I mean, my God, it's a 15-footer. But I hate the way that everything is geared to the offense. It's a hands-off league, so you really can't compare the players of today versus the players of yesterday. I just saw a guy an executive of the NBA. He said on my Twitter this morning that if Tiny Archibald had played today with no hands allowed, nobody could keep him out of the paint. Nobody could stop him. They couldn't stop him then. Yes. They certainly couldn't stop him now. But I hate the way that they don't call moving picks all the time. They pick certain times to do it. Every dribble is a palm. It's amazing. Walks, so many walks. So there's a lot to me that I don't like about the league.
I understand, but the last thing I have for you, Peter, is what are your thoughts on Kyrie Irving potentially sitting or just not playing because he doesn't want to get the vaccine?
Hey, his body, his paycheck. You either play by the rules or you don't play. So, unfortunately, by not playing, I think he will play. He's not going to give up this kind of money. Not a chance. Mm-hmm. But if he does, if he puts his money where his mouth is, he can do that. Fine. Just, don't. He's not going to come around, any kids that I know that are unvaccinated. I don't want him spreading some disease that he's picked up somewhere. And, the biggest shame of it all is that he committed to the Nets. He committed to what they're trying to achieve. And so they have rules that have to be obeyed. And The state made the rules. The league doesn't have the rule. The league is not mandatory from the league, but 94% of the players have gotten it. But so it's gonna, you can't play in New York, California, in San Francisco, New York City. His choice, fine. But I think it's all, knowing Kyrie a little bit that I do. I think it's all. I think he's very affected. I think he's all show. He's willing to lose a certain amount of money to make people think that he cares about everybody in the world. But how about your teammates? How about your franchise? How about your fans that you're being paid an outrageous amount of money to play for, to represent? How about them?
Well said. Peter, this has been an incredible sit down. I hope a lot of people get to listen to what you have to say. This has been one of the coolest things I've done. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Take care.